Hi guys. So today's video, I thought it'd be really fun to kind of chat with you guys a little bit about some books that I think have really good openings. Openings I think are kind of funny because I've heard people say that when they go to purchase a book at a bookstore, they'll read the first chapter, or they'll read the first paragraph, or things like that, and sometimes even just the first line, and see if that first chunk hooks them, and if it does, they'll buy the book. But I personally, maybe it's just because I'm a fan of fantasy and I think it takes a long time before you feel really grounded and rooted in a fantastical world, I don't really go into books expecting the openings to wow me, but when I do find a book that just kind of snatches my attention immediately, it's always really fun. Surprisingly, a lot of the books on this list are not just fantasy, given that I read so much fantasy. You would think it would be all fantasy, but I actually have a couple of historical fiction. I have a science fiction and kind of a futuristic one, stuff like that. So it's kind of a mix of stuff, but I'm going to start with one that is historical fiction. It is based off of a true story, but there's some liberties taken in the interpretations, and that would be Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. This book follows the last woman to be executed in Iceland. I thought it was extremely atmospheric. That could be in part because I read it when I was in Iceland. It's very tragic. It is not the kind of book you read as a pick-me-up at all, but it's done in an interesting manner in that it goes back and forth between third person and first person depending on whose perspective you're reading about. So while I think the book itself takes a little bit of time to feel invested in, I think the opening is amazing. And the first sentence just kind of sets the tone for the book so well. The first two sentences, so I'll read those to you guys. It says, "They said I must die. They said that I stole the breath from men, and now they must steal mine." That snippet, to me, a lot of the book, you don't know if she's innocent or she's guilty. So the fact that she's saying, they said this, they said I must pay, she's not really admitting whether or not she's innocent. Switching now to a fantasy book, I think the book Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson has a great opening. I think that the prologue is so interesting. I wouldn't say that Sanderson is particularly known for his openings, just because if anything, it's the opposite. Everybody tells you, just keep reading, because he lays a lot of groundwork throughout the book that pays off in the end, and I personally would rather that than have a great opening that just kind of flickers out. But this one was a nice balance of, there was groundwork laid throughout. It did take time for things to build, but I was always interested throughout the book, and the very beginning especially interested me. Part of the reason why I think the opening to this one does work so well is because it starts off with a man who's being held in captivity, and you kind of get this idea that he let it happen so that he could get to another prisoner. And then I don't want to tell you what happens to that other prisoner, but it's like, what? Oh my gosh, what is happening? The magic is hinted at in the book right away without you feeling too confused or too overwhelmed by it. I think it just really gets the book going off well. Next up is a book that I unfortunately don't have on me, but it's one of my favorite books, and that would be Red Rising by Pierce Brown. So the opening to Red Rising is kind of interesting because it has this little snippet before you start, and that little snippet is amazing. Oh my gosh, like right away it's so dark and tragic and kind of morbid, which anytime any of those things are in the opening, I'm immediately like, check, check, check. And then from there, it takes a little bit to, in my opinion, get invested because it kind of starts to set up this society, this world, how oppressed the people are in this world. And then at the end of part one, which part one is only like 55 pages, I believe, oh my goodness, I can't like tell you guys because I don't want to spoil anything, but it was so sad to me and just so tragic, and I ate it up. Books don't make me cry, but that first 50-something pages of that book, it came pretty close. I'm gonna switch now to a young adult book that happens to also be science fiction, and it's kind of one that inspired this video because I'm not even done with the book yet. I started it recently, and man, I'm really liking this book. And the book itself would be Scythe by Neal Shusterman. The premise of this book is that the world is perfect now. We know everything. There's no longer war. There's no longer poverty. Everything is taken care of, and as a result, people no longer age and die. And so, to prevent overpopulation, people called Scythes are trained to kill people. Throughout the book, we get, before every chapter, an excerpt from a journal. It's required for the Scythe to keep a journal. And the very opening is an excerpt from a journal, and this first sentence, oh my goodness, like, This first sentence, like, I read it and I was like, oh man, I'm gonna like this book. The first sentence says, "We must, by law, keep a record of the innocents we kill." The paragraph that follows that, and then the sentence right after that paragraph, I'm gonna read to you guys too, because this is one of my favorite openings to any book. It says after that first sentence, "And as I see it, they're all innocent, even the guilty. Everyone is guilty of something, and everyone still harbors the memory of childhood innocence, no matter how many layers of life wrap around it. Humanity is not innocent. Humanity is guilty, and both states are undeniably true. We must, by law, keep a record." To me, that is one of the most intriguing, just draws you in openings I have ever found in a book. I absolutely love that. Oh, that opening, just, my goodness, like, what the heck? I just think it's so good. Maybe some of you are sitting there like, why are you freaking out? Like, it wasn't that good. But I just think it's amazing. It immediately made me invested in what was happening. And that's very rare for me in a book. I usually go in expecting, like, oh, it's going to take a while before I care. And I, right away, cared about what was going to be happening in this book. Alright, going now to a book that is one of my favorite books. It's a historical fiction. It's about Vikings. And I always praise this series for doing such an amazing job of making you feel like you are a part of that time period. It just does such a good job of engrossing you in the story and in that culture back then. And the first sentence, I think, is kind of a representation of that. The book itself is Viking Warrior. It's part of the Strongbow Saga by Judson Roberts. I highly recommend this series. I think it's one of the most underrated series of all time. The main character is telling the story, so it's in first person. I gotta flip now to that first page, but it just says in the first sentence, "In one moment, the Norns changed the pattern they were weaving in the fabric of my fate." I just think the language and the way that it's incorporating their beliefs right away in that first sentence, and also setting up intrigue for what happens next, I just think it's done so well. That first sentence is so fantastic to me. So those are 5 books that I think have phenomenal openings, whether they be the first sentence or the first page, first scene, or just the first chunk of the book. But as an honorable mention, I had to bring up Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. So the reason this book is getting an honorable mention, and it's not just included in the initial list, is because it basically has like 5 different openings. There's a lot of different characters. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's a very different world. The prelude, it epitomizes that. It's super confusing. No idea really when you first are reading it. When I was first reading it, I was like, I don't know what's happening. But right after that, the prologue is super awesome. The first sentence of the prologue says, "Szeth son Vallano, truthless of Shinovar, wore white on the day he was to kill a king." I mean, come on, that first sentence, that, I don't know how you can read that first sentence and not be like, whoa, what's gonna happen next? Anyway, that's it for my books that I think have great, interesting, intriguing, amazing openings. Let me know what books you guys think have great openings, whether they be the first sentence or just the first chapter, whatever, any book that gripped you right away, right from the start, because like I said, I don't normally care that much if the opening pulls me in right away, but when it does, it's pretty fun. Anyway, if you guys liked the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Click the little bell icon to get notified when I post new videos, and check out some more of my videos right over here. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.